Just short of 2 weeks before her assassination, Rosa Luxemburg delivered a final speech in the frigid November air, intent on addressing the German Revolution. She compared the situation to that which shaped the Communist Manifesto, one tied to social democratic parliamentarism, an opportunistic political fog demanding a thorough examination if workers were to succeed. An example was needed for this task, leading Rosa to interrogate a text used for years by the SPD to legitimize their parliamentary activity, the 1895 introduction to Marx's Class Struggles in France by Frederick Engels. Oozing with advocacy for parliamentarism, the preface supposedly asserted that modern conditions made all other forms of class struggle obsolete. To Luxemburg, the events of the German Revolution disproved this assertion. How could the co-founder of scientific socialism so clearly contradict everything he'd written up to that point? The truth was that the contradiction was manufactured. In 1925, a new copy of the introduction was published, revealing the full extent of the degeneration of the SPD. SPD development was part of a common trend in the late 19th century, triggered by the failure of the 1848 revolution to gain steam. There was an active movement in Europe in the years leading up to it, causing Marx, Engels, and other prominent thinkers to believe that socialism was just around the corner. All that was needed was the successful proletarian seizure of state in a developed enough country, likely France, to stir the waters, spread to surrounding countries, and begin a global transformation of society through the continuous establishment of more proletarian dictatorships. What resulted were the measures found in the Communist Manifesto, which, in anticipation of this, listed the immediate tasks of the proletariat. In 1848, the movement peaked with the February Revolution in France and saw its potential smothered by the ruin laid upon workers and their leaders in the June days which followed. It had failed, completely shattering the dream, causing leaders like Marx and Engels to quickly update communist action and theory in response. It was shown that workers were not sufficiently developed enough to successfully carry out proletarian revolution, directly because capitalism had not advanced to a necessary degree. Following this, parties across Europe emerged with significantly different, novel aims. Revolution was relegated to the background in favor of legal struggle in the industrial and political field. Parliamentarism, the participation in elections, was at the forefront of this new form of struggle. With this freshly gained tool, proletarian armies were cultivated and were to be deployed when capitalism was ripe for revolution. In Germany, the SPD utilized this method to astounding success. Their numbers grew year after year, reflected by the amount of Germans voting for the party. Everywhere the SPD could be heard, positions in government were near guaranteed. It was proven possible to infiltrate bourgeois political institutions, which came with the potential for their overthrow from within once proletarian stronghold was too much for the bourgeoisie to bear. Given the strength in numbers resulting from this method, Engels declared that
the bourgeoisie and the government came to be much more afraid of the legal than of the illegal actions of the Workers' Party, of the results of elections than of those of rebellion.
Besides clearly being effective and efficient, it was also viewed as the only realistic form of action feasible in a quickly industrializing world. The focus on legal struggle was further, and in doing so primarily justified by military advancements granted by capitalist innovation. Engels had witnessed massive industrial strides following 1848, all of which benefited the militarist half of the bureaucratic military machine naturally arising in Europe. Military strength, which had already been amplified by the growth of armies to heights never before seen, we're talking millions, was now additionally enhanced. Whereas before, it would have been difficult, if not impossible, to mobilize such a gargantuan population, this hurdle was overcome by modern marvels. Locomotives were invented, and the rail they traveled on rapidly covered the continent, allowing these troops to move quickly and efficiently. As Engels explains in the 1895 introduction, this substantially boosted mobilization capabilities.
By means of the railways, these garrisons can, in 24 hours, be more than doubled, and in 48 hours they can be increased to huge armies.
Another industrial wonder further bolstered military strength, the progression of firearm technology. More effective killing machines were introduced, which were specialized and sophisticated. Prior to this, guns were simple with rudimentary ammunition, resulting in relatively slow loading speed. Now advancement required each model to have a unique casing, which made them easier to load and use rapidly. A machine gun could now mow down any mob with thousands of bullets within minutes. Engels, being the military nerd he was, analyzed how these factors affected the prospect of battle between the proletariat and army, determining the former stood no chance at contesting this military might. When ammunition was simpler, it could easily be produced with lead and gunpowder. Unique ammo casings were made in factories for the military, limiting the availability of weapons necessary to wage war against them. Dynamite could now easily deal with barricades, which had characterized street fighting. Without something to make up for these shortcomings, workers were disadvantaged, leading Engels to declare,
Rebellion in the old style, street fighting with barricades, which decided the issue everywhere up to 1848, had become largely outdated.
In her speech, Rosa strongly contested the stance, believing it to have been established on a faulty premise. She believed that
when Engels' preface declares that, owing to the modern development of gigantic armies, it is positively insane to suppose that proletarians can ever stand up against soldiers armed with machine guns and equipped with all the other latest technical devices, the assertion is obviously based upon the assumption that anyone who becomes a soldier becomes thereby, once and for all, one of the props of the ruling class.
the movement in Germany completely debunked this major justification for parliamentarianism. On November 3, 1918, sailors in the harbor of Kiel, Germany committed an act which would send shockwaves throughout Deutschland. Although peace negotiations had begun between Germany and the United States, they were ordered to carry out additional attacks on the British naval fleet. Germany had been all but defeated, making this a purely symbolic display of German will. What made prideful imperial propaganda was viewed by the outnumbered and outgunned sailors for what it was, a suicide mission. Rather than die for the sake of soothing the ego of their oppressors, they deposed their commander and raised the red flag on their battleship. A mutinous wave swept the surrounding fleet, and within days this spread to most ships on the German shore. Workers on the mainland commenced strikes in solidarity with the sailors, which German soldiers were mobilized to suppress. Instead of the bloodshed one would expect to ensue, they joined the workers in solidarity. Within days, most of the coast was under proletarian rule. Workers had stopped the first great imperial conflict, and in the process started the German Revolution. Kiel, the spark which ignited this explosion, did not occur in a vacuum. The length and hardship of war fostered resentment among the sailors, which festered over time. It exploded to the surface when their final mission presented an existential choice between liberation or annihilation. The former was chosen, its success ensured by tactics inherited from class-conscious dock workers they frequently visited. What was this if not socialist influence? Contrary to the views presented by Engels in 1895, the military was proven far from impenetrable. It only makes sense. The draft had primarily plucked soldiers from the working masses to fight a war only their overlords would reap the benefits of. Being proletarian, they were susceptible to and subsequently succumbed to class consciousness, a stark contrast from the static portrayal Rosa observed Engels to have made. All of this should have been obvious. It is well known that Engels was the intellectually inferior of the iconic duo, something even he acknowledged. However, even with this accounted for, his mistake is out of left field. How could one of the founders of scientific socialism, an ideology rooted in materialism, be so wrong about something so fundamentally materialist? In her speech, this thought is shared and contemplated by Rosa, stating that
it would be absolutely incomprehensible, in the light of contemporary experience, that so noted a leader as Engels could have committed such a blunder, did we not know the circumstances in which this historical document was composed.
When the 1895 introduction to class struggles in France was written, it was done so under special request by SPD leadership. At the time, the party was facing a bit of turmoil. A faction within it was opposed to the obvious course it was taking, that of an organization solely engaged in parliamentarian struggle with no intention of liberating workers with the advantage it brought. This seriously frightened SPD leadership, fearing a split or collapse of the party. In response, Bebels and other top officials searched for convincing arguments to win over opposition and maintain party order. What better voice for this task than that of Engels, an authority if not the authority in the party and the proletarian movement as a whole? For this very reason, Bebels and company embarked on a trip to the island paradise of England, where Engels had chosen to live out the rest of his days. Upon meeting the old man, a grave image was painted. Opposition was portrayed as potential regression into anarchism, a fitting appeal for the original anarchist annihilator. Under these circumstances, it was determined that Engels accepted the limitations of writing with a strong emphasis on elections. What resulted was an official document parliamentarians could point to as they more and more engaged in solely legal struggle. Though this ploy certainly played a role in the contents of the preface, Rosa, through no fault of her own, was unable to see the far more sinister, grand picture. It's true an attempt was made to control the introduction, but the convictions of Engels proved sturdy. More than a manipulation was needed for the text desired, so they censored what was written. The unaltered text was consistent with revolutionary communism. While legal struggle was emphasized, this was nothing new as it was seen as fundamental to proletarian victory. However, this was in no way a replacement for revolution. It was preparation for it, as SPD omissions reveal. In the original text, Engels states that
everywhere the German example of utilizing the suffrage, of winning all posts accessible to us, has been initiated. Everywhere the unprepared launching of an attack has been relegated to the background.
The words in red were omitted by the SPD in their official introduction. Engels speaks of unprepared attacks being done away with, making it clear that the attack itself is not abandoned, rather ones which lack sufficient preparation. This stance is correct for the same reason we reject terrorism. More often than not, such acts jeopardize progress made by giving the state reason to strike. Instead, the attack is to be launched with sufficient preparation when the opportunity arises. Further reading confirms this assessment, with Engels saying,
"To keep this growth going without interruption until it gets beyond the control of the prevailing governmental system of itself, not to further away this daily increasing shock force in vanguard skirmishes, but to keep it intact until the decisive day. That is our main task."
Unprepared attacks, vanguard skirmishes, chip away at power gained through preparation. Instead, this power should be kept uncompromised to be used at its fullest potential when a prepared attack, the decisive day, is called upon. Without demonstrating legal struggle as merely a phase in the movement, this tool, along with factors it arose from, seem a constant.
Rosa may have considered this censored introduction a good reflection of existing SPD policy, but she did not view it as representative of the broader politics of the revolutionists Marx and Engels, who Luxemburg knew understood that electoralism, while a valid mode of struggle, was no substitute for militant revolution. The speech reflects Luxemburg's confidence that Engels would have heavily scrutinized his own introduction and the tactics it justified, stating,
"Those who know the works of Marx and Engels, those who are familiarly acquainted with the genuinely revolutionary spirit that inspired all their teachings and all their writings, will feel positively certain that Engels would have been one of the first to protest against the debauch of parliamentarism, against the frittering away of the energies of the labor movement, which was characteristic of Germany during the decades before the war."
Engels would pass away the same year the introduction was published, leading Luxemburg to believe he never got the opportunity to do this. What Rosa didn't know is that Engels did, in fact, have the opportunity to witness the vulgarization of his words, at least the beginning stages of it. In a letter to the infamous renegade Karl Kautsky, Engels addresses an excerpt of the introduction, stating,
"I was amazed to see today in the Voyeur an excerpt from my introduction that had been printed without my prior knowledge and checked out in such a way as to present me as a peace-loving proponent of the legality commune, which is all the more reason why I would like to appear in entirety in the Neue Zeit in order that this disgraceful impression may be erased."
We can rest easier knowing that Engels did not betray the revolution and did try to make his true ideas known to the working class, but he underestimated the opportunism of the SPD.
On the night Rosa Luxemburg delivered that expository speech, the declaration of a new stage in the struggle was the aim, not complete erasure of Engels and the tactics he praised. These tactics were the logical answer to the time operated in, when revolution was distant, and were necessary to avoid the outcomes seen in the June days and the Paris Commune. During this period of capitalist stability, the military was inaccessible, meaning the proletariat could not possibly hope to contest their mights, making legal struggle all the more crucial. If presented as an absolute, calling for revolution's replacement, history would make a mockery of this position, but it was not such. Instead, it was preparation, a stage which dwarfs the dramatic revolutionary window as shown by the little censorship needed for the 1895 introduction to be presented as parliamentarian propaganda. But this may be confusing. After all, had the SPD not just proven that legal struggle ultimately results in betrayal best exemplified by Rosa Luxemburg's tragic fate? This would certainly be the case if not for the Bolsheviks demonstrating how powerful this tool could be in capable hands.